last week, in our discussion regarding continuity, Stan and Linda pushed us to acknowledge that Jewish continuity is in danger because not enough of our people, and I'm quoting them, have a sense of obligation. Why Micha sees that that danger is greater outside of Israel is a topic for another discussion. Micha suggests that our continuity can only be assured through steady, ongoing commitment. And there's a bit of a difference, nuance between obligation and commitment, a commitment from within that's stimulated from within. For some of us, the source of this commitment is our openness to accepting divine will as an authority, demanding obedience, which sometimes we give blindly and sometimes with much thought, in fulfilling laws. For some of us, the source of our commitment is desire. Desire to belong to our heritage, and that desire can take different forms. Some of us are taken with the pre-state thinker Achad Ha'am and his cultural secularism. We, in that group, want to connect to our tradition, maintaining a meaningful connection, attachment to our past, without surrendering the least bit of autonomy. And for us, Judaism is not a religion in which one believes, but a nation to which one belongs. Instead of faith in a reality greater than ourselves, Judaism, according to Achad Ha'am, centers on faith in the group to which we belong. And think about groups that you belong to, individuals that have led those groups, that because of their faith, you tend to have that as well. Belonging is the emotional fiber for this cultural secularism, which is my Jewish identity. And this is why I desire to study my nation's national spirit, which is the Tanakh. The wisdom and the treasures of our Jewish culture expand my horizons, and that's why I'm interested. Some of us are drawn to Aleph Dalet Gordon, also a pre-Zionist thinker. We're drawn to his theory of mystical secularism. Gordon believed that actually secular Jews have a more direct path to God than religious Jews. Anybody want to venture why, based on something we said last week?
Is it something to do with nature?
Well, he is very involved with nature, but why would he say that in this group there is more possibility for real connection with God rather than the observant? Do you remember what we said last week about Buber and the difference that he asserted between religion and religiosity? And so For Gordon, organized religion builds barriers between us and God. And a person needs, he said, to comprehend with his or her entire being that he is one with the cosmos. His whole existence is connected with every other thing that exists, including God. Secularists can believe in God, but functions differently than a religious person. And for Gordon, getting back to what Linda just said about nature, for Gordon, the religious experience can be felt, remember what I said, mystical, when looking at a breathtaking view, when listening to music, when meditating. The mystical secularist is not interested in rigid laws. In fact, not in any laws, but are interested in the unification, I quote, of our soul with divine presence that infuses reality. I look around at nature, and yes, he was a Zionist and a pioneer pushing for working the land, Aleph Dalet Gordon, and you look around and that gives you a sense that there has to be a God. And I study, if I'm part of this group, the Tanakh, the Bible, to awaken within me, together with nature, a feeling of spirituality. And some of us hear Chaim Nachman Bialik's call for halachic secularism. Now, that sounds like an oxymoron. How can you be secular, longing for autonomy, freedom, and still call yourself a halachic secularist? I'm going to throw that out to you before I proceed. Anybody want to suggest how those two words can go together and you're not surrendering your freedom? What would he mean by that word halachic? Following certain code.
There's certain laws. I'm
What
thinking
kind
there's
of law?
certain laws that he would respect. And it combines with Judaism.
Okay. But what would move a secularist to follow those laws, if not out of obedience?
Choice, that you have a choice of which laws you want to follow.
Okay. Okay. Somebody else, I think, was going to say something?
Oh, well, to me, it almost speaks to conservative Judaism. It's tradition, but living in the world and not closing oneself off from the world.
Okay. Okay. Bialik's vision, and unfortunately hasn't fully yet come about. On one level, yes, we'll see in a moment, but his vision conceives of halakha without authority. And he says, we all need to have duties. It's not because somebody else is imposing upon us, but we need structures. He says, a free life means listening to the desires and the demands of previous generations without feeling a need to obey them. As Linda said, we make our choices. Our past does not control our present, but it does influence it. We hope for the better, in a positive way. Now, Bialik was a student of Achara'am, and he respected him, but he wanted more. Bialik believed that pure intellectual or cultural studying of the Tanakh was not enough. We're not just looking to think and be inspired, but, and this is why he calls it halachic, he wanted to be sure that we're inspired enough to act, that deeds are important. And one has to be committed to that we're not just, somebody just said, we're living in the real world and we want to take from our studying and we want to apply it. Or else it's really just a theoretical moment. And there's a need, there's a great need. Bialik felt that we could revitalize Jewish religious law to be followed out of desire. He was known on Shabbat afternoon to gather a group of people for what was called an Oneg Shabbat every week. And they would have lectures, they would have discussions, they would listen to music, but he felt that that was the beginning of having people physically set aside time and feel the oneg of Shabbat. And as many feel that the Shabbat, especially in the age that we live, is perhaps one of the most important experiences for us to have in this technological world. And so it's an easy sell. More and more studies are showing that something as wonderful as technology is also turning into a bad addiction. There are groups, support groups, that help you find a way, and it's not just children actually, but this group that I know of, to find a way to get your child to come to dinner because he won't or she won't get off that device. Also finding that, and we talked about this when we spoke about Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, that the more and more people are communicating through emails, through texts, through messages, the less able they are. It's going to be interesting when we go out and meet face to face with people, that people don't know how to communicate. What's the plus of sending an email? You tell me, or a text. What's the plus and what's the minus?
You're not back and forth. You're saying what you want to say, and then you're not interfacing with them. You're not immediately responding to other people's thoughts. There's no click. There's no like a, it's like a synapse going. It's just
Yes.
one, totally.
Okay, so that's a minus.
But
What
it
do
was-
people,
Another
was-
minus
Yeah.
is the text is immediate. Absolutely immediate. They hear it, they look at it, and either they respond or not. The email takes time because that person may not get a little ping or may not know that he or she has received an email, and it might take an hour to respond. You know, not everyone
Also-
responds to an email right away.
no,
Some people take a day.
Both of them
Also-
have a drawback though, because what you see in front of you are words. You don't see body language, you don't see emotion, and that really cuts you off. That you know, when people started using memos to talk to each other in the good old days, which took a while to get it, and they sent a memo, nobody knew, were you angry? Were you happy? I mean, these are the things that are missing from this kind of communication.
Yeah, Shelley?
Also in an email and a text, one can think before they write. One can edit before they send. So it's premeditated, it's thought out. You say, usually you try to say what you want it to sound like. However, in the interpretation, the reader can interpret it in their own way, not having to see, like Marlene says, your emotions or your feelings or your body language.
Yeah.
And they both are terrible.
I find that both text messages and emails are much too fast a response, often given without thinking it through and without editing. It's an instant thing. People expect that I sent a text and why don't I have an answer yet? And I find it's very similar with emails, even in my practice.
That's another thing in talking about one's dignity, that they also feel, and Micha addresses this in his book, children that are happy to get home because they've been bullied at school. Now they come home, they're on their phone, and in a different way, they're being bullied because they've posted something and they are waiting desperately to see if their post has been liked. And if it hasn't, that impacts on them. The addiction is something fierce, or the need for people with these selfies to give a sense of self by putting yourself out there. All of this comes to say that everyone should appreciate, and even Mark Zuckerberg's sister does, Micha mentions in his book, the need to have at least one day, and what they're calling it in the States is reboot. And here they'll say it's an unplug yourself day. Now, Micha discusses the fact that some of his secular friends, they're not doing it to become more religious, and they're not doing it in a halachic, as we understand that, way. They will drive, they will use electricity, but they have said that this is a day where we and our children are not going to be doing anything virtually. We're going to eat together, we're going to play board games, we're going to maybe go swimming at the Yarkon, but we are off that device. Now, Bialik said, when he talked many, many years ago to the pioneers, he said 6 days a week, we are struggling to remain alive. And that can be said of today as well, everywhere. Shabbat is the time to reach for the meaning of life. Now, does it make a difference if someone is taking hold of Shabbat out of desire or out of feeling obligated? As long as they have a sense of Shabbat. Is there a difference? Is one more essential than the other?
Bracha, can I give something from my own personal experience?
Sure, Margot.
Back in the good old days, when it was just email, and I became a department chair, and I had an associate dean above me who would send emails at 3 o'clock in the morning and expect you to answer.
Yeah.
Which I never did. And I made a decision that I would inform everybody, my deans, my colleagues, my staff people, that from sundown on Friday till sundown on Saturday, I would not do any emails or phone calls unless it was really a urgent. And I did go Shabbos morning to shul, but in the old days, I would have done email in the afternoon, but I didn't do it, okay? And it was the best decision I ever made to take a break like that. And what happened was that even after I was no longer involved in that kind of administrative position, I kept the same rule.
The only change I would make to your rule, Margot, is I would have told them that I'm not available from Friday night to Tuesday night.
Couldn't do that,
You
but
couldn't do that, no.
no.
Okay,
And-
well, there. Now, so maybe the motive wasn't out of an obligation to Shabbat rules, but it's a sense of, I need this time to be kadosh. And what does kadosh mean? When you say holy schmoly, what does that mean? It's different. It's set apart from our routine. Now, what Bialik was pushing for, when I said before, a steady commitment that in whatever form you observe Shabbat, it should be every week, or else it's not something that's really internalized within you. Now, Bialik also suggested that we create a new 10 commandments. He was more concerned with the relationships between man and man. And he even said, what I really want is for these commandments to speak to the relationship between country and country. Now, we haven't necessarily seen that come about, but all of these are efforts. I said Tel Aviv before. Shelley, are you there? Ellenzweig?
Yes,
No? Yes.
yes.
Have you ever been, in the month that you're in Tel Aviv, gone to the Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat on the beach?
No, because they only do it once the warmer weather starts. I'm not there at that time.
Ah, that's true. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
But Bracha, I've been there a few times. It's wonderful.
So describe it, Merle.
It's like a prayer in. It's just a beautiful gathering of people from all walks of life, walks of religion, and you're out there you're just overlooking the ocean, and it is truly a sense of community.
Yeah. So now, how can all of these diverse members of our nation and tradition live harmoniously? Micha says a few things. It's not going to be by being dogmatic. And he's saying that both to the religious and to the secular. And it's not going to be by being ignorant of tradition. For Micha, it's all about dialogue. Firstly, what he calls intergenerational dialogue. We're relating to our past, and it is based on our national treasure, which belongs to all of us, no matter what, based on our holy texts and a concern with interpreting them, arguing about them, and even rebelling against them. Now, what image do you have as I just said that? An image that we'll be seeing, well, maybe virtually next week. What is the 4 children if not that? And we often say that it's not the Rasha, the contrary, who's the more difficult, but it's the She'ino Yodei Lishol, the one who doesn't even know how to ask. But picture that. No one is to be excluded. And the Rasha might be a Rasha in the sense, not a bad person, but how he sees himself as part or not part of the community, but he's knowledgeable. He's knowledgeable. And that's the bottom line. Both sides have to have a level of familiarity with our texts. And what he's saying is that there are some observant that don't have that. So both sides have to have that. And Micha, to quote him, says, Judaism is the Jews' ongoing conversation. Judaism is the Jews' ongoing conversation. The conversation about Judaism is Judaism. He says the religious must converse with the past. And we touched on this. And not simply subordinate themselves to it. Now, I think there are many religious Jews that don't feel that the law is here and they're here, and they don't feel subordinated. They just have this frame of mind that I am part of something bigger and I listen to that. But if you want to converse with our texts, you have to be open to really studying it. And that's something that we have been open to. And the secular must study, because if you haven't studied, you can't talk in any field. If you don't know what the field of study is, you can't be part of the conversation. And secondly, he says, everyone alive now has to talk to everybody. Everybody. Embarking on this endeavor to put an end to the rift, Micha suggests that we follow in the footsteps of 2 models. And I'm going to share my screen. One is Rabbi Hillel of Hillel and Shammai of the 2nd century. And the other is the Sephardic community. Okay. We have 2 selections here, both from Sephardi, highly respected and filled very important roles. And the first, Rabbi Ben-Zion Meir Chai Uziel, says the following: living conditions, changes in values, and technical and scientific discoveries are creating generation after generation new questions and problems that demand solutions. We cannot avert our eyes from these questions and say, as some of his parallel Ashkenazi said, anything new is forbidden on the authority of the Torah. It's open to innovation. Now, people ask, how did he dare, and he was a chief rabbi, how did he dare advocate for innovation? How can halakha be changed without denying the perfection of its divine creator? I'm going to say that again. How can halakha be changed without denying the perfection of its divine creator? Well, a student of his, Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, who became the Sephardi chief rabbi in 1973 till 98 when he died, says the following. This was possible only because the authority was given to the sages of Israel down the generations to renew halacha according to the changes in times and events. And only because of this could the Torah exist in Israel and the Jews walk in the way of Torah and mitzvot. What Halevi is saying is that the secret of the endurance of the Torah and halacha is dafka because we have been open to living in the real world, not ignoring it, and renewing based on what's going around. Now, renewing doesn't mean just watering down, but it means saying there's a reality out there and we have to really deal with it. And again, he says, like what we claimed pre-modern time in Europe, that if we want to keep it alive, it's going to only last if we refresh it, we renew it. Then it will still have its relevance. Now, the next three texts are selections regarding Rabbi Hillel. You're all familiar with Rabbi Hillel, famous for Imein ani li mili, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? We're going to uncover in these texts why Micha points us toward Rabbi Hillel as a model for weakening this rift. And it's because, as we'll see in these texts, please look for this, Hillel's perspective on the value of being human, or I should say more correctly, the value of every human being, one's openness to others, and his application of God's laws. So look for these three elements: the value of a human being, openness to others, and his application of God's laws. Okay, so the first, Hillel said to his students, they would see him with a towel walking toward a bathing place. Hillel said to his students, have you not observed how the caretakers in the theaters and other public places always wash the statues and keep them clean? Because the students were perplexed because he was going to a place like that and he was saying that it was a mitzvah. He continues, if then such care is bestowed on inanimate sculptures, the works of man, it must surely be a holy duty to scrupulously clean the handiwork and masterpiece of God. So what is Hillel saying there? What message is he giving his students and us, who are also his students? What is it in this paragraph?
Makes me think about recycling and cleaning up the forests when we picnic and all of the things to honor what is given to us by God, the beauty of our everything that we have. We have to be that's all I can say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so certainly We want to create a clean environment. What more?
We want to be open to change, to modernity.
Well,
We
how
want
is that text telling us that? Because he's willing to go to the bathing house?
Is he talking about, as the previous rabbis, Sephardic
No.
rabbis, talking about when we do have new things and new technology, that's helping us to keep improving and improving and improving what we've been given by God?
And that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I did not
I
have that
think-
in mind.
No,
Somebody-
I have in mind that the handiwork of and masterpiece of God are human beings.
Yeah.
And we constantly have to refresh how human beings are treated. And that's the handiwork I think he's talking about.
Yeah, I agree. Is that Sarah?
I
Yeah.
see that.
My
Yeah.
idea is that it's God who is working through the man to make the handiwork, to make the statue. It's not man who made the statue. It's God who made the statue, but uses man as a tool.
Okay, very
So,
interesting,
yeah,
because we have two competing thoughts here by you having said that. I'm sorry, who just said that? Because I don't see you.
You mean me or someone
Yes.
else?
You,
Yeah,
who are you?
Sarah.
No, somebody else said something else. No, that was
It's
still you?
Sarah, it's Sarah Lakin.
Oh, okay, two Sarahs, good. Okay, so on the one hand, we heard, I think from Sarah Wunsch, that this is showing how every individual or a human being has such value that, of course, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to. If you take care of inanimate sculptures, then of course we have to take care, not because we're created by God, yes, but no, but just because we have our own significance. And then I think the other Sarah was putting more of the emphasis on the fact that God made us. Now they go hand in hand. They go hand in hand. But this, to begin with, is saying each of us is created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. I am, you are, and that means, Micha says, that all of us are precious, and so everyone has to look at the other as also being created in the image of God. And where are you going to come to reject them? You might disagree. Remember, he said dialogue is all about, but as long as you're dialoguing. That's the first text. Now, I mentioned Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. So we know that Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, who actually were practically family, they had members marry into each other, they debated. There were at least 300 machlokot, debates in the Talmud between them. And we know that usually we follow Beit Hillel. By the way, Beit from Bayit means the school of Hillel. So here is a debate. The sages taught, how does one dance before the bride? Meaning, what does one recite while dancing at her wedding? Better to envision, at the Bedekin, that the bride is sitting and people come to her. And what do you usually say? Gloria, you're muted, but you're mouthing something. You're still muted. Gloria, you're muted.
You
Okay.
look beautiful.
You say you look beautiful. Okay, now, do you do that no matter what? Now you'll see what I mean. Beit Shammai says, one recites praise of the bride as she is, emphasizing her good qualities. And Beit Hillel say one recites a fair and attractive bride. Beit Shammai said to Beit Hillel, in a case where the bride was lame or blind, would you still say with regard to her, fair and attractive? Meaning, you're going to tell a lie? The Torah states, keep you from a false matter. Now, why do people say, because, every bride is beautiful because there's a glow, but what is the purpose of complimenting a bride, even if she isn't particularly beautiful? It really has to do with the same reason why such a private, personal experience of getting married is meant to be celebrated with many people, friends, family surrounding you. What would be the point at that moment telling her that she looks beautiful?
It's her
Why?
special day, and you should give her the feeling that she is special. And by telling her she's beautiful, it gives her that aura that she will feel beautiful.
Absolutely, Simone. Now, she, even if it's going to be the happiest day of her life, is nervous. Is nervous, and you want to be there to support. And people around are there to say, it's the two of you, but here's your community. Now, Shammai says to Hillel, you would lie? How could you lie? And it's a good question. Here we have a rabbi, one of our greatest teachers, and he's going to lie. He's going to take a very explicit law that says not to lie, and he's going to ignore that? What's the justification? How does Hillel explain the fact? Sometimes it's not clear, but here, keep you from a false matter. What would be the reasoning behind, aside from what Simone said, but connected, that he would justify and not feel that he was being disrespectful to God?
Bracha, if we go back to the fact that each human being is made b'tselem Elohim, if we don't praise the bride, we're not praising God's creation.
Okay, that's one way of looking at it. But still, Shammai should have understood that, you would think.
Shammai was always going on the straight and narrow, and very often, which is why we listen to Hillel more than we listen to Shammai.
Because you don't want to follow the straight and narrow. I know you, Marlene.
No, but his straight and narrow made it more difficult for people.
Yes.
No,
yes.
but isn't there something about in Jewish law also that you want to respect and honor and create a yachas, a relationship that is supportive? Is there anything that would argue that and would be contrary?
Well, what Hillel was thinking is that one is meant to use, Micha calls it, his or her own moral intuition. Moral intuition, meaning Hillel didn't just read the law and follow it every single time that he was in a position to, but he would look at the law and he would think to himself, what does God want me to do in this situation? And if I understand God's grand plan of what you're saying, Linda, of the way I want people to relate to each other, then Hillel said, I believe in this situation, because the bride needs the support. Or Micha would also say that if the groom asks a friend, isn't she beautiful? Of course you're going to say she is, because the groom will run away if you don't, because he's nervous as well. And so what in fact Hillel is doing in this case is that he doesn't feel he's being disrespectful to God, to religion. What Hillel is doing, he's attaching religious value to people's inner feelings. And that is no less important than that lie. That is very, very powerful. It's very similar to Moshe's brother Aaron, who was known to be an Ohev Shalom, a Rodev Shalom, to love and to run after peace. Well, what's the difference? He didn't just sit there, but he would sometimes, to bring people together, he would tell a bit of a white lie. Now, there are minuses to that. They get together and they really haven't solved anything, but he did it for the sake of Shalom Bayit, so that he would trade off. Sometimes you have to trade off between two positive values. Somebody wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's Helen. I was just going to say, you can always find some source of beauty in something you're looking at if you really seek it. And when you're looking at a person that in general terms is unattractive, then you have to look behind it. And going back to Hillel's philosophy about not ever hurting someone, I don't know the exact Hebrew thing. It's do unto others as you have them do unto you.
Yeah.
I think this comes into it. And I think that to do otherwise is cruel. And I think we have to if you see a bride or a baby who's not attractive by our standards, if you look harder, you'll find a spark somewhere. It's there. And we have to focus on that rather than all this other stuff. That was one thing, but I'm going to take you off topic for a second and just go back to Bialik and give you a very quick personal anecdote. My late father-in-law was at the same yeshiva with Bialik and cavorted with him as a youngster.
Wow.
And at many of the sessions that you were referring to, you'll be shocked to hear the discussion was on the discovery of Darwinianism. And it was just out at that time. And I know in my father-in-law's case, it definitely colored his viewpoint. It's when he then shifted gears and did not become a rabbi, although he lived.
Well, that was a wise choice.
Although he lived an observant life, it didn't have the same depth as it did post-Darwinianism. And Bialik was one of the main leaders of that group. I just thought it was an interesting anecdote. And it's interesting that in all your reading, you've never come up upon that on Bialik, I'm saying.
Yeah, I'll look into that. Thank you. Wow.
You're welcome.
No, I love these stories where these people are real people, because Helen's giving proof that her father-in-law sat with him.
Cavorted with him.
Cavorted, excuse me, cavorted. Okay.
Something else? Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I say? I prefer my one-woman show, and my show, the text is determined by the audience. And I have a poem that I performed by Bialik, and very spiritual poem that's called Mein Mame Zichrona Livracha. And it deals with a woman benching the Shabbat candles and what she goes through. She's in sheer poverty, and she has 2 coins, and she runs out and she buys 2 candles for the Shabbat. And she prepares herself, and she has no food, she has nothing, and she's benching the licht, and suddenly a tear falls down on one of the candles, and one of the candles is unleashed. And she can't understand why God would do that to her. And she continues to pray and pray. And then she opens her eyes again, and the candle was relit.
Hmm.
It is an absolutely beautiful
Oh,
poem.
story. I'm sorry, who was speaking?
Bina Singer.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Let's look at our last text about Hillel. They have been debating and debating and debating, and finally, a voice from heaven calls down to them. Since both these and those are the words of the living God, why were Beit Hillel privileged to have the halacha, the law, established in accordance with their opinion? The reason is that they were agreeable and forbearing, showing restraint when affronted. And when they taught the halacha, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beit Shammai. You understand that? But they wouldn't just say what they thought in laying down the law, but they would also repeat what Beit Shammai. And not only that, moreover, when they formulated their teachings and cited a dispute, they prioritized the statements of Beit Shammai to their own statements in deference to Beit Shammai. So clearly, why does Micha bring this as a model for how this rift can be broken or healed? Look at the respect that Hillel gave. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't have their moments with some horrific moments between them in debating, even violent. But for the most part, look at the meaning that this is giving us. Now, what Micha says is, unfortunately, the behavior of Beit Hillel does not characterize 21st century Judaism. And he calls for a return to that. As he said last week or the week before, that part of our tradition is to re-examine and to renew. And so let's make sure that we keep Judaism alive. And we need all of us to do that. By the way, just 2 other very short anecdotes about Hillel. It's told when he was young, one day he didn't have the coin that he needed to give to get into the house of study, the Beit Midrash. And even though it was snowing outside, he climbed up on the roof because there was a window, and he looked through so he could study. That's how he wanted so much to take in. Now, the other story we all know is that somebody who wants to convert comes first to Shammai, and he isn't willing to teach him because he just says, come on, teach me on one foot. Hillel is willing to teach him. Now you put those 2 stories together. Hillel was on the outside, so he knew what it felt like He wasn't inside that Beit Midrash sometimes, so he knew what that was like. And maybe that's what influenced him, but it doesn't matter. But then that would be cause for him to accept somebody else who wants to come in, even if doing it in a rushed way. So, Micha says, a worldview that exalts the individual encourages us to listen not only to our own moral intuitions, but also to positions that contradict our private sense of morality. Humans were created in the image of God, so all humans deserve to be listened to. I would close with a couple of comments. Just let me close the screen. There's yet another machloket debate between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. There's a tradition of making pilgrimage to Yerushalayim on a festival. And the pilgrims would bring 2 korbanot, sacrifices. One was a burnt offering, which was totally devoted to God, and it was burnt in entirety. The second one was called the festival peace offering. That was burnt to an extent, but then it was eaten by the people. Now, the debate is, what is the value, monetary value, of each of those korbanot? Shammai said, well, the burnt offering should be worth 2 coins, and the festival one only 1 coin. And Hillel said the opposite. Now, why? Shammai felt, well, of course, the coins are going to go to the more valuable korban, and something that's totally dedicated to God, it's got to be worth more. And the one for the people is worth less. Hillel said the following: the peace offering that's eaten by the people, that should be considered more valuable, because I believe we should invest more in a sacrifice that will bring joy to the people. In the context of what we've been talking about, concern for everybody, I think that's a beautiful message that Hillel gives. Pesach is upon us. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to say the funny comment or the more emotional comment first. I'm going to go with the silly comment first. So some of you might remember, it's been a year that we've been Zooming. And last Pesach, we began, and you might remember that I shared an experience that I had the previous Pesach, which was my first here. And my siblings had let it to be me to have the Seder in our house, because all these years I haven't, and it was a delight. But in wanting to please, I guess, my brother, I decided to buy a roast. Anybody remember how much I paid for that roast? A lot of money.
of shekels, like 400 shekels.
No. I paid over 800 shekels for the roast. Well, I want to tell you that in the 2 years that I've been here, I have changed, because yesterday I spent $299 on my entire butcher shopping. Okay.
There's something good about the
Yeah.
COVID, you see.
Yeah.
Oh, you think that's why? Okay,
Yeah.
all right. I want to close though with a quote from one of my favorite modern day commentators, not in this century, but Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And he said regarding this holiday of spring and the month of Nisan, how poor we would be if we had not learned to celebrate our spring. The season of spring reminds us that just as nature renews itself, so does humanity. And we're seeing renewal, and I pray that it will continue, and we should all be well and have a wonderful, wonderful Pesach. And if anybody happens to make the pilgrimage for the festival to Yerushalayim, I invite you all to Nachama's house for the Seder.